Top 10 countries that still support Rodrigo Duterte in 2025. It's 2025, and guess who's still making international headlines? Rodrigo Duterte. Yep, the former Philippine president may be out of office, but his shadow still looms large across the globe. From nations defending his brutal war on drugs to others echoing his anti-Western stance, Duterte hasn't disappeared, he's just gone global. Some world powers are even cozying up to his former allies. Surprised? You'll never guess which countries still stand behind him. Number 10. Nicaragua. Okay, let's talk about Nicaragua, and let me say this loud enough for the people in the back. This country isn't just sipping coffee in the corner while the world debates democracy. It's shotgunning loyalty shots with Rodrigo Duterte, and it's not even trying to hide it. Under the iron-fisted rule of Daniel Ortega, Nicaragua has turned symbolism into a political sport. The guy's been clinging to power longer than your uncle's flip phone. And guess what? He loves Duterte. Not because of the beaches. Not because of the food. Because of the ideology. These two are like geopolitical twins separated at birth, fueled by anti-Western rhetoric and allergic to international scolding. You think Duterte's war on drugs was brutal? Ortega's war is on democracy itself. And they're both out here high-fiving each other over who pissed off the UN more. You'd think they'd be in competition. Nope. They're vibing on the same frequency. We don't need your Western lectures. We've got our own version of order. And it starts with a boot on your neck. It's like watching two villains in a movie discover they're actually long-lost besties. Oh, you locked up your political opponents too? Same. Oh, you don't like human rights groups either? Dude, we should totally hang out more. Relatable joke? This is like when you had that one rebellious friend in high school who encouraged every dumb decision you made. You both skipped class, blamed the system, and convinced each other you were misunderstood geniuses. Then you grew up. But he didn't. He's still in your hometown, shouting conspiracy theories outside the gas station, and Nicaragua is buying him snacks. And let's be real, Ortega's support for Duterte isn't about admiration. It's about justification. When the world calls you a tyrant, you point to someone just as ruthless and say, well, he did it too. It's dictator logic. If I'm crazy, at least I'm not alone. So yeah, Nicaragua might be small on the global stage, but when it comes to symbolic support, it's waving the Duterte flag like it's the Olympics of authoritarianism. And if that doesn't make your stomach turn or your brain itch, you're either asleep, or you've normalized insanity. Now tell me, is this diplomacy, or just dysfunction in disguise? Drop your take in the comments. Let's see who's really awake. Number 9. Turkey. Oh, you thought Turkey was busy frying kebabs and minding its own business? Please. Behind that touristy postcard of Istanbul and the soothing sound of call to prayer is a government playing chess with human rights. And guess what piece they're defending? Duterte. President Erdogan isn't saying much publicly about the former Filipino leader's war on drugs. And that's exactly the point. Silence is never neutral. In politics, silence is permission dressed in a tuxedo. And Erdogan? He's nodding along like a guy in the back of the room during a shady business deal. Don't mind me, I'm just watching. Let's not play dumb here. Erdogan doesn't care about the war on drugs, because he's too busy waging war on journalists, judges, teachers, activists, people who blink twice, and anyone who dares breathe in the direction of dissent. The man sees Duterte's law and order playbook and goes, nice. I'll raise you a media blackout and a couple hundred political arrests. These two? They're not politicians anymore. They're brand ambassadors for authoritarian vibes only. If they were in high school, they'd be those two kids who keep getting sent to detention for establishing a personal dictatorship during group projects. You know the ones. And here's the real kicker, Erdogan loves law and order, as long as he defines the law and he gives the orders. The same way Duterte defined justice as a bullet to the back of the head without trial, Turkey's regime defines it as shutting down opposition newspapers and calling it national security. Relatable joke? This is like when you show your toxic friend a red flag in their relationship and they say, well, my partner did it too, so it's fine. Erdogan is that toxic friend. The kind that sees Duterte's violent crackdown and says, yeah man. Sometimes you just gotta silence people to keep the peace. Give me a break. Let's call this what it is, mutual validation among autocrats. They don't want peace. They want control. And they're building their little club of strongmen, who smile in front of the cameras and strangle dissent behind closed doors. And what's worse? The world lets it happen. We watch Turkey grow its economy, expand its influence, cozy up to both NATO and Russia like it's playing the field on Tinder, and we still pretend Erdogan's silence on Duterte is diplomatic neutrality. Nah. It's cowardice. Strategic, calculated, and dangerous cowardice. So yeah, Turkey isn't loudly cheering for Duterte. But it doesn't have to. When you turn your back on human rights, you don't need to clap. You just need to stay quiet long enough for the violence to fade into background noise. And we the people, better wake up before law and order becomes the new slogan for legalized tyranny. Comment below if you see through the silence too. Number 8. Pakistan. Let's not pretend. You and I both know what's going on. We live in a world where brutality is just rebranded as tough leadership, and people nod along like it's wisdom. You've seen it. You've felt it. That tight, uncomfortable smirk people give when they hear about extrajudicial killings but don't want to sound too political. Yeah, that. Now here's the stinger. Pakistan straight up backed Duterte's war on drugs. Not a shrug, not a silence, a full-body nod. Why? Because to them, a bullet in the name of security is better than a conversation in the name of justice. You ever notice how the loudest defenders of law and order usually have the most to hide? Like the neighbor who's obsessed with HOA rules but secretly has 3 felonies and a bunker full of canned beans. Duterte's drug war was chaos with a badge. Over 12,000 people dead, no trials, no due process. Just names on a list and a body count that kept rising. And Pakistan? They looked at that and said, impressive. Why? Because they see themselves in that mirror. A nation with a long history of disappearing dissent in the name of internal security. When journalists vanish and activists go silent in Pakistan, it's not a glitch in the system, it is the system. And it gets darker. Both countries push the same narrative. We're not violent, we're vigilant. Cute wordplay, until you realize it's just trauma dressed up in military fatigues. You want a metaphor that slaps? This is like 2 people bragging about how fast they drove drunk, while the rest of us are still cleaning blood off the sidewalk. You ever wonder why bad ideas spread faster than good ones? Because bad ideas have no shame. They don't tiptoe. They stomp. Duterte stomped, and Pakistan clapped. Now here's something they don't tell you. In 2017, Pakistan's then leader literally said he respected Duterte's policies. That's like a pickpocket saying he admires identity theft. One crime validating another. But the real tragedy? The people of these countries don't get a vote in this bromance. They're too busy trying to survive the fallout. These leaders swap praise while their citizens swap fear for silence. So the next time someone tells you Duterte was just doing what had to be done, ask them this. What does it say when your biggest cheerleaders are countries still figuring out what freedom even means? Comment below if you're done mistaking control for leadership. Because if this is what respect looks like, it's time we disrespect it. Number 7. Hungary. Let's cut the sugar and bite into the bone. You ever notice how strongman leaders always seem to find each other? Like overconfident gym bros who never actually lift, but somehow always have an opinion on your form. That's Hungary and Duterte in a nutshell. And guess what? Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán didn't just tolerate Duterte. He admired him. Like a student who copies the wrong answers on purpose because it just feels right. Here's the kicker. Orbán didn't criticize Duterte's bloody drug war, didn't flinch at the human rights violations. Nope. Instead, he referenced Duterte's leadership as a strong national model. A model? For what? Turning democracy into a dinner buffet where only the elite eat and everyone else washes dishes? Now I know what you're thinking. Wait, why would Hungary, a European country, back a Filipino president known for state-sanctioned violence? Simple. Because Orbán sees Duterte not as a warning sign, but as a blueprint. Let that marinate. Hungary, under Orbán, has slowly mutated into something that looks like democracy from a distance. But up close? It's more like democracy in cosplay. Free press? Muzzled. Independent judiciary? Co-opted. Immigrants? Demonized. Opposition? Treated like a virus. Sound familiar? Exactly. You ever wonder why the world's strong leaders always sound like they're reading from the same playbook? Because they are. And Chapter 1? Silence critics. Then pretend it's just patriotism. And here's your spicy fact. In 2017, Hungary officially called Duterte's governance inspiring. Inspiring, like your uncle who thinks yelling at waiters is confidence. This is where the metaphor hits. Duterte is Orbán's spiritual protein shake. Bitter, controversial, and consumed with the delusion that it makes you stronger. Let me drop a curiosity loop on you. You ever wonder why so many world leaders are terrified of empathy? Why being soft is treated like a disease, while being tough just means acting like your trauma has a badge and a press conference. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. It's easier to rule through fear than to lead with vision. And fear sells. Fear silences. Fear simplifies things so people stop asking questions like, is this even legal? Or should we be applauding a guy who made death lists? Hungary didn't just avoid criticizing Duterte, it held him up like a trophy. Like, look, a fellow authoritarian with slightly better hair. And behind the scenes? Deals, diplomacy, and dinner handshakes with the same man the UN was investigating. Makes you wonder who's really watching the watchman. The worst part? Regular people in both countries are just trying to get by. They don't want war zones in their streets or propaganda in their news feeds. They want jobs, safety, and a decent night's sleep. But leaders like Orbán and Duterte? They'd rather stage manage a crisis than solve one. So next time someone says, Hungary respected Duterte, remember, admiration from a government drifting toward autocracy isn't a compliment. It's a warning label. And if that doesn't make you question who's running the show, maybe you've already stopped asking the questions that matter. Number 6. Saudi Arabia. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia and Duterte, A partnership so polished, it almost looks like diplomacy. Until you realize it's basically two people shaking hands while standing on top of a pile of overworked migrants. Now, here's the punchline nobody wants to laugh at. Saudi Arabia actually valued Duterte's labor policies. Yeah. The same policies that treated OFWs like cargo, exported, boxed, and slapped with a handle with prayer sticker. You know something's wrong when a country infamous for mistreating foreign workers turns around and says, "Hey, we like how you handle your labor force." That's like Dracula complimenting you on your blood donation system. It's not flattering, it's freaking terrifying. Let's be real. Saudi Arabia didn't fall in love with Duterte because of his human rights record. No, they liked the efficiency. The no questions asked export of millions of Filipinos willing to break their backs, swallow their tears, and send every peso home like good little heroes. You want the truth? OFWs are the Philippines' unofficial national product. And under Duterte, they became even more essential, like rice, remittances, and relatives who can never mind their own business. So naturally, Saudi loved him. Why wouldn't they? He delivered labor on tap, no drama, no fuss. Just silence and sacrifice. And then there's that cute little phrase, migrant protection. Oh please. That's the diplomatic way of saying, we won't beat them on camera anymore. Protection? From what? Better opportunities. Let's not kid ourselves. Saudi Arabia's idea of labor rights is like giving someone a slightly softer chain and calling it progress. Even after Duterte stepped down, they kept the love alive. Economic and diplomatic ties still tight, still transactional, still dripping with the kind of respect that only works if you never ask where the bodies are buried, or how many domestic workers came home in boxes. But here's the joke that hurts the most. Filipinos still dream of going there. Not because they love the sand or the heat or the soul-crushing loneliness, but because it still pays more than staying home. So when you see Saudi Arabia smiling at Duterte's memory, don't mistake it for admiration. It's gratitude for keeping the factory running. One human soul at a time. Number 5. Indonesia. Let's talk about Indonesia, our friendly ASEAN neighbor, our karaoke duet partner in every WFW dorm, and apparently, our kindred spirit in hardcore punishment politics. Because if there's one thing both countries bonded over during Duterte's term, it wasn't tourism or trade, it was bullets, brutal laws, and a disturbingly shared love for the death penalty. Yeah, I said it. Indonesia loved Duterte's war on drugs, not in a we admire your courage kind of way, but in a hey, that's exactly what we're doing too, kind of way. It's like watching your neighbor burn their backyard just to get rid of weeds, and instead of calling the fire department, you grab your own matchstick and shout, "Let's go." Now don't get me wrong, drugs are a problem. But here's the catch, you don't solve addiction with a body count. That's not policy, that's laziness with a badge. And yet, Indonesia looked at Duterte's body-strewn war and nodded like it was some genius TED Talk. You know what they call it? A hardline stance. Sounds noble, right? Tough, brave, heroic. Please. That's just rebranded fear-mongering. It's the political version of slapping duct tape on a leaking pipe and calling it engineering. Except in this case, the leak is poverty, the duct tape is state violence, and nobody wants to admit the pipe is cracked because of decades of corruption and neglect. And the ASEAN diplomacy part? Oh yeah. Duterte's Regional Sovereignty Act had Indonesia clapping from the sidelines. He pulled the whole "we won't be bullied by the West" card, and for a second there, everyone in the neighborhood felt like they were watching the underdog rise. Too bad the underdog was barking louder than thinking. Duterte was like that one guy in a family gathering who suddenly starts screaming, "Don't tell me what to do," even though nobody was even looking at him. But Indonesia? They loved that energy. Because they hate Western intervention too, but for slightly different reasons. You know, like getting called out for human rights violations. Always inconvenient. Now let's talk hypocrisy. The same Indonesian leadership that says no to drugs is also fine with corruption charges, so thick they could be sold by the kilo. So when they praise Duterte for being strong, what they really mean is, thanks for making us look less insane. And don't even get me started on regional sovereignty. That's just code for don't judge us while we do whatever we want to our own people. Neat little trick. It's like telling your mom not to scold you for failing because at least you're not doing drugs. So yeah, Indonesia stood by Duterte. Not because of noble alignment or shared diplomacy goals. But because misery loves company, and authoritarianism makes for great karaoke harmony. And if anyone tells you it was about protecting culture or discipline, ask them one thing. Since when did good governance require a body count? Number 4. United Arab Emirates. You ever wonder why the most grateful OFWs are also the ones who've mentally checked out? Yeah, those smiling selfies in Dubai malls? Zoom in. That ain't joy. That's survival mode in high definition. Let's not kid ourselves. The UAE didn't keep Duterte close because of shared dreams. They did it because he knew how to export labor like it was mangoes and coconuts. No shade, it worked. We're basically the Amazon Prime of human labor. You want polite, hardworking, obedient? Boom. We deliver. On time. With a smile. And 3 remittance apps. See, the UAE didn't love Duterte because he was presidential. They liked him because he knew how to keep the WFW machine humming without complaint. Migrant welfare? Let's break that down. It wasn't welfare as in dignity. It was let's not let the workers riot. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Filipinos built half the Gulf skyline, but we don't even get proper shade at the bus stop. Literally. We're melting in 48-degree heat, building luxury towers for CEOs who will never learn our names. And yet, we say thank you. Now pain point incoming. We romanticize working abroad like it's a medal of honor. It's not. It's a lifeboat. A golden one, sure. But still floating in someone else's ocean. And Duterte? He handed out paddles like candy. Go abroad. Be a hero. Meanwhile, he stayed dry. But here's the plot twist you didn't see coming. The UAE respected that. Because while other presidents bent over backwards to keep remittances flowing, Duterte pushed for economic independence, not to stop OFWs, but to stop depending on them forever. He actually tried to grow something at home. Shocker, right? And you know what's wild? The UAE saw that as strength. They didn't flinch. They leaned in. Because real power respects power, not apologies. You show you can stand on your own, and suddenly, the conversation shifts from supplier to partner. So yeah, labor ties stayed strong. But this wasn't some emotional bromance. It was two hustlers respecting the grind. The UAE saw a leader who could keep the human export business clean on paper and brutal in execution, and they said, let's talk business. It's not pretty. It's not heartwarming. But it's the truth. And sometimes, that's more useful than hope. Number 3. Vietnam. You ever notice how the loudest guy in the room usually has the weakest grip on reality? Yeah, we see it at family parties and foreign policy meetings. Meanwhile, the quiet ones, like Vietnam, they're not just sipping tea. They're watching, calculating, playing chess while everyone else is playing karaoke. Let's get one thing straight. Vietnam didn't praise Duterte because they liked his personality. They respected his strategy. And why? Because unlike some leaders who bark about the South China Sea, Duterte walked in, looked at the chaos, and said, okay, we either start a war we can't win, or we play the long game. That's not cowardice. That's calculus. And Vietnam? Oh, they loved that. Because while the world was yelling about sovereignty like it was a TikTok trend, Duterte was quietly securing oil and trade agreements without firing a single bullet. Diplomacy isn't sexy, but it pays the bills, and builds the bridges. Literally. Here's the pain point, brace yourself. We Filipinos love to romanticize bravery as being loud, angry, and ready to fight. But bravery isn't shouting at a superpower with no backup plan. That's not courage, that's cosplay. Real bravery is knowing when to speak, when to bite your tongue, and when to smile while you're outmaneuvering your opponent under the table. Vietnam saw that in Duterte. They didn't see a lapdog. They saw a shark, cruising low, quiet, dangerous. Because unlike most leaders who grandstand for headlines, Duterte understood something Vietnam already mastered. Regional unity isn't a slogan, it's a strategy. You want to survive the Chinese tide? You don't scream. You band together and paddle. And here's the stat you didn't know you needed. Vietnam's trade with China grew over 30% during disputes. That's right, while waving their nationalist flags, they were quietly making bank. Sound familiar? It should. That's the same page Duterte was reading from. Now here comes the metaphor. Foreign policy is like dating someone hotter than you don't pick fights. You learn their weaknesses, you play nice, and when the moment's right, you negotiate better terms. Vietnam clapped for Duterte not because he was fearless, but because he was smart enough not to fake fearlessness. Because here's the brutal truth. Screaming about your rights while economically dependent is like flexing in a rented car. It's loud, but it ain't yours. So Vietnam? They saw a guy who wasn't pretending. A guy who knew the ocean is wide, but alliances are wider. He didn't isolate. He organized. Didn't provoke, he positioned. And for once, someone in Southeast Asia didn't fall for the trap of noisy nationalism that leads to empty pockets. That's not just strategy. That's survival dressed in silence. And you know what? Sometimes the quietest diplomacy leaves the loudest impact. Number 2. Russia. Ah yes, Russia. The land of vodka, winter, and world-class poker faces. And let me guess, you're still surprised they liked Duterte? Really? The guy walked like a tank, talked like a tank, and made Western diplomats sweat like they owed him rent. Of course Russia admired him. See, Putin doesn't throw compliments around. He doesn't need to. The man rides bears shirtless, he is the compliment. But when Duterte popped up with that, I don't need America energy, Moscow clapped. Finally, someone in Southeast Asia who wasn't kissing Washington's forehead and asking for another loan. You want the truth? Russia didn't care about the Philippines, not really. They cared about someone standing up to the West without trembling. And Duterte? He didn't just stand, he stared the US in the eyes and said, I ain't your errand boy. And that made Russia fall a little in love. Because nothing warms a cold Kremlin heart more than watching America lose influence. It's like watching your ex's new relationship fall apart. You don't need to do anything. Just sip tea and smirk. Now let's talk defense cooperation, which is just a polite way of saying, here's a few choppers, don't ask what strings are attached. And the Philippines? We took them. Because hey, sometimes the devil offering weapons is better than the angel sending thoughts and prayers. Let's not lie to ourselves here. We didn't cuddle up to Russia out of romance. We did it because we were tired of being the sidekick in America's Marvel movie. Duterte was done playing Robin. He wanted to be Batman. And Russia? They handed him the cape and said, go nuts. But here's the joke you're not ready for. We still thought we were the main character. Yeah, us. A middle power country playing Cold War dress-up. Duterte flirted with Russia to show the West we had options. But Russia knew it was just that, flirting. Not love. Not marriage. A geopolitical situationship. Yet still, Duterte got respect. Because unlike most world leaders, he didn't care who liked him. He wasn't trying to win prom king. He was trying to win leverage. And for a hot minute, he made the Philippines feel like we weren't just a colony with extra steps. Russia didn't love us. But they respected the attitude. And sometimes? That's worth more than 1,000 foreign aid handouts and fake smiles from countries who only remember your name when there's oil nearby. Number 1. China. Oh, here we go, China. The frenemy your parents warned you about, but you still invited to the family party because they brought lumpia and a suitcase of cash. Let's just stop pretending this was some deep spiritual alliance built on shared values and ancient respect. Please. This was straight-up transactional. China saw Duterte like a pawn who could move like a queen. Unpredictable, aggressive, and perfectly positioned in a region the West keeps snooping around in. And Duterte? He leaned into it. Full send. While the rest of the world was gasping, but what about the West Philippine Sea? Duterte was already on a plane to Beijing, holding a rice bowl and asking, how much for the bridges, boss? And you know what's insane? China said yes. They didn't just invest, they love-bombed us. Roads, railways, ports, like an ex trying to win you back after cheating on you, while still cheating on you, with your ocean. They're literally building runways on reefs we claimed were ours. And we just smiled, waved, and took the cash. That's not diplomacy. That's delusion in a barong. But let's be fair, Duterte didn't do it because he liked being dominated. No. He did it because he was sick of playing the US's broke little brother. You remember those days? Waiting for leftover military gear, praying for another foreign aid grant like we were contestants on America's Got Dependents. So Duterte turned east. He thought, if we're gonna be stepped on, at least let's charge for it. China paid. In billions. And yes, we got infrastructure. But we also got debt, surveillance deals, and a front row seat to watching China play Monopoly in Southeast Asia, with our islands as property. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. China didn't admire Duterte. They admired his utility. The guy was a battering ram, breaking decades of pro-West habits in the blink of a soundbite. They called him a friend, but make no mistake, China doesn't have friends. They have useful acquaintances. And Duterte? He was very, very useful. Now here's the punchline. Filipinos started defending China. Like a dog barking at its owner because the burglar gave it a bone. But China built us a bridge. Yeah? And they built a military base on your reef. Hope the toll fee covers sovereignty, champ. Let's not kid ourselves. Duterte's pivot to Beijing wasn't about peace or love. It was about leverage. Playing China against the US like divorced parents fighting for custody. And guess what? It worked. Kinda. We got stuff. We also lost ground. Literally. But the wildest part? China still praises Duterte. Even now. Because he cracked the door open. And they don't need to kick it in, we're holding it for them, smiling like a broke landlord with a rich tenant. Bottom line, Duterte saw the world like a poker table. China was the high roller. And for a brief moment, the Philippines got to sit beside the whale. But don't confuse that with winning. We weren't the player. We were the bet.